In thinking back to, I think it was 1967, when I visited John at his home and studio in Orangeburg, New York, the experience was most delightful and pleasurable to meet a gentleman like Mr. Costigan and the fine painter that he is. I brought with me my former instructor at Pratt Institute, Mr. Gus Simiotti. And that was one of the reasons that we went up there, because Gus hadn't seen John for a number of years. They were contemporaries at Salmagundi Club. I wanted to see Mr. Costigan because I'd never met him, even though he was a member of the club. He introduced us to his family, and then we went down to his studio, which was in the basement of his house. Here in this basement and cellar, Mr. Costigan produced these wonderful paintings that reflected the nature and its full glory of sunlight, and it certainly was amazing to see these wonderful paintings that he had done down in this basement with artificial light. His experience and observation and being outdoors and studying the effects of light on nature, I guess, was so impressed upon him that his memory was so sharp that he was able to do this in his environment as he had there in his studio.
I mainly collect Midwestern art, but there are two artists whose work I admire above all others: the Italian old master Alessandro Magnasco and the New York artist John Costigan. Although Costigan was still living when I first became aware of his art, I never had the pleasure of meeting him. It was in the mid-1960s that I first saw a painting by him hanging in the office of a friend. I was immediately attracted to this painting, and some 20 years later was able to purchase it. The painting is called Spring Landscape and was painted about 1940. It's a typical work by Costigan, showing the rigors of farm life on unfriendly soil. But yet it shows the joys as well: the farm family, their children, and the ever-present farm animals. Costigan's art has impact and special meaning for me. I see it as social commentary, vividly depicting the trials and the joys of the times.
Most of his paintings, if you look at the figures, the way they're painted with the fluid way of painting and the anatomy that he suggests is done so spontaneously, and it gives you the feeling of rhythm and life, and they're really alive.
I hated those braids. I was about 7 years old when I posed for this etching. My sisters and I were required to keep our hair in braids until we went to high school. Then we could have our hair cut if we wanted, but I didn't like those braids at all. I posed for this picture in the basement of the house, and that's where Dad's studio was. It was kind of hard to sit still for long periods of time, but Dad evidently understood this, and he let us take breaks frequently. You felt kind of important posing.
Dad was a very quiet man, very tall, slim, had a beautiful head of white hair, which he usually topped with a brown felt hat. And he always wore a white shirt, unbuttoned at the neck. He also liked to smoke cigars, always with a cigar in his hand. And if you were in the house when he was smoking, you could see a cloud of smoke in the room. Dad was born in Providence, Rhode Island, February 29, 1888. Orphaned at age 12, he went to work at a local machine tool factory. His Aunt Nellie, matriarch of a family vaudeville team, the Four Cohans, arranged for Dad to come to New York City in 1904. She got him a place to stay, and his Uncle Jerry got him a job at the firm that made the Cohan show posters. While Dad went from pressboy to apprentice artist at the poster firm, his cousin George M. began to make a name for himself in vaudeville. Our Aunt Lila, one of Dad's four sisters, would later co-star with George M. in a couple of hit shows.
I regret not having seen the Costigan retrospective, which opened at the Payne Art Center in Oshkosh, Wisconsin in 1968, and which toured the country for 3 years under the sponsorship of the Smithsonian Institution. But that show preceded my discovery of Costigan. Interestingly, shortly after the opening, there was an article in a local newspaper. The article's headline said, "Artist William E. Costigan finally gets one-man exhibition." Of course, the article made a mistake by saying William instead of John Costigan. The article was generally favorable. Another error is the implication that this was Costigan's first one-man show. In point of fact, it was at least his 12th one-man exhibition. The prestigious Corcoran Galleries and Smithsonian in Washington had one-man shows, as did the Grand Central Galleries in New York City and the Art Institute of Chicago.
Paint exhibition was a high point in my dad's life. This followed a quiet period during the 40s, and then in the 50s, people who were familiar with his work sought him out as their teacher, and they would come to the farm and take lessons from him there. This was sort of a rebirth of recognition for him. And then the paint exhibition was like the icing on the cake. They borrowed paintings from museums all over the country and from collectors, and so it was a collection of works that he had done throughout his career. He was thrilled that they had brought together this exhibition, and this happened at a very nice time in his life. He only lived a short time thereafter, but he enjoyed the recognition of this exhibition before his death. About when he turned 80, Dad started having serious vision problems. Meanwhile, he had been forced to sell his farm to the local water company, who agreed to let him and Mother live out their lives there. He was almost totally blind when he died in August 1972. Mother died 3 years almost to the day after Dad died, and almost immediately upon her death, they bulldozed our house down and took all the memories with it.
One day in the fall of 1987, I was sharing a meal with Father Oscar Mannion, a member of the Jesuit community where I live at St. Peter's College in Jersey City, New Jersey. Father Mannion is the director of the art gallery of St. Peter's College. And I mentioned that I had an uncle who was rather famous as an artist. And Father Mannion's response was rather polite, since no doubt he listens to many people who say that they have relatives and friends who are famous artists and might be interested in having an exhibition in his gallery. And the matter was dropped then, but a few days later I met him in corridor and I showed him a catalog of my uncle's paintings. And as he was perusing the catalog, his eyes lit up and he said, "I know this man." As a result of this discussion with Father Mannion, the exhibition in honor of Uncle Jack did take place in the fall of 1988, and this turned out to be a fortuitous event because it was the centennial year of Uncle Jack's birth.
If I had to identify two things that most inspired Costigan to paint, one would clearly be family, specifically the farm family, displaying either joy or reverence for their idyllic surroundings. The other would be the mute eloquence of the woods and plowed fields, often in the midst of which Costigan would place a lone figure or small figure group, frequently including passive farm animals. The figures invariably were dwarfed by nature's transcendent majesty.
Costigan was a watercolorist of the type that among painters is referred to as one who paints with his galoshes on. The paintings are very wet, never dry. Compositions are always dramatic, with checkerboard contrast, dark against light, with a depth of color that creates a pattern and design that delights the eye. His figures are sound, alive, and with rhythm and movement, done with spontaneous directness. His oils sing with brilliance.
We'd also swim sometimes in the Hackensack River, which bordered our property. There were some sandy spots, and Dad would join us and go for swims every now and then. That was kind of fun.
Anyone who's ever viewed a Costigan retrospective will quickly detect certain recurring themes, most notably that of the sturdy farm housewife displaying gentle affection for children and animals.
In Dad's portrayals of her, Mother was first a lone model, then a farm housewife. In reality, she was also an artist in her own right. She had started sculpting in clay as a little girl in Germany when her father worked in a brickyard. Some of Mother's work managed to get exhibited along with Dad's.
Costigan's pre-1920s work betrayed traces of the explicitness and colorations characteristic of the show poster designs he was doing at the time.
Etching and lithography demand the hand of an artist with control and knowledge. Costigan proves this again and again in this difficult medium, in his facility in drawing and in strong design.
Uncle Jack captured in his paintings both the simplicity and profundity of nature. Trees were a frequent subject of his work. In a way, the woods were like a cathedral to him.
It is difficult to classify the artist John Costigan. Was he an impressionist, a genre painter of farm scenes? Was he a naturalist or a landscapist? Was he a luminist? He has been called all of these and more by various scholars, critics, and gallery owners. In my opinion, he was probably a combination of all of these.
I have never seen a work by Costigan that was belabored or overworked. His spontaneity captured the spirit and the mood, which is immediately felt by the viewer. Truly a fine artist.
I can still smell the linseed oil, the turpentine, the paint. I like the smell of his studio.
I know this man.